Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Cara.
So, this is a companion episode to one that was released earlier this week that featured Lisa Phillips talking about teen romance and first loves. One thing that we hear from listeners all the time is that they love first person teen interviews. They want to know out of the mouths of babes, quite literally, sort of what's happening, how they feel, what their experiences are. They want to sit in a room with a kid who will talk to them, basically. And so that's what today's episode is about. It's an episode with a teenager who I'll let you describe because she's really quite incredible and quite singular in what she's doing. But it's an episode where you can listen to a teenager talk about what dating is all about in 2025.
And what's so great about our guest is, first of all, she came to us, she found us. Her name is Elle Christine. She's a 16-year-old high school student in Austin, Texas, and she goes to a school where half her day is spent pursuing a passion project. And her passion project is about helping teens learn how to date. And she does this by meeting teens where they are, which is on TikTok. And she created a TikTok account that gives really basic, fundamental dating advice. And it also helped her create an app. She's an AI-based teen dating app. And she gives advice on TikTok, and she reads lots of research, and it's based in all different kinds of data and research around teens and dating and relationship and psychology. So she's not just pulling it from her own experience, although that's part of what she does. She's also looking at what experts have done and using that through an adolescent eye to give advice. And she's really trying to encourage young people to engage with each other. And if you listen to our episode with Lisa Phillips, her concern is that many teens are not taking the emotional risks and being vulnerable to get into in-person relationship, that a lot of stuff is happening online, and it's sort of stopping at the point where they would actually be in a relationship with each other. So it's a really fun conversation. It's a very specific perspective, right? Elle is one teenager in this country who's working on a specific project, who has the life experience of one young person in this country. So it's not a blanket guidance for everybody. It's kind of one view into teen dating and advice from a teen to other teens about how to get there.
Yeah. But that said, Vanessa, she is sharing her singular experience and the advice that comes with it to a very big audience on social media. And other kids are consuming that advice, and they are often using that advice. So hearing what she has to say is super interesting. We hope you enjoy.
Hi, Elle.
Hi.
We're so happy to have you here. Welcome.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure.
It's the perfect Valentine's Day, Valentine's season episode. Here at Less Awkward, we are big believers in youth voice. So if we're going to talk about your age group, we better hear from your age group, and your age group has a ton to contribute to the world. You are very much leading that charge on the dating front. And so we are thrilled to have you in the house.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. Thank you for having me.
So, Elle, you reached out to us cold, which is awesome and takes a lot of courage. And so fantastic skill right there, which that sort of courageous risk-taking attitude will become relevant as we explore conversations about teen dating, but we'll get back to that. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and the project you're working on?
Yes, of course. It's funny that you mentioned the cold email because that was actually part of my school curriculum. A little bit about me is that I'm a 16-year-old junior, and I go to a school called Alpha High School, which is like a kind of alternative high school where basically we do all of our academics in the morning, and then in the afternoon, we're freed up to work on a passion project. And so they give us kind of guidelines, become an expert, build an audience, launch your business, all of that stuff. It's all supposed to be based in passion. And so one of my assignments for the week was to find a couple podcasts that you're really interested in, and reach out to them. And we were all up until like 12 a.m., like writing these emails, like, okay, like using ChatGPT, but then also having the human touch, like making sure these were perfect. And that's part of like my school curriculum. But basically what I'm working on is a safe teenage dating coach that utilizes an AI avatar. And what this AI avatar is trained on is it's basically like your smart friend who knows a ton about psychology, that when you ask her a question like, hey, like, should I play hard to get with this guy I kind of like, to make him like me? She's like, actually, the Journal of Adolescence states that you need to be emotionally vulnerable to have the best chance at a healthy relationship. That's what I like to think of the bot as your friend that's just really smart. It's trained. The LLM is fine-tuned on the best psychologists, dating relationship experts. It's all based in science to help teens more effectively date. And not to ramble and go on a tangent here, but it's because the modern dating world has changed so drastically with the advent of social media, then COVID making all relationships, even the in-person ones, go online. Teens just haven't gotten back in person yet. And this has led to the rise of crazy terms that just parents aren't super familiar with. And so what my avatar does is it bridges the teen language with the science, and gives the most effective response for a teen to help them with whatever.
Is there something a nugget that was underlying all of this? Was there a moment in your life or something that happened to you that sort of set your passion, I guess, directed at passion?
For me, it was, I just remember I was in 8th grade and I was sitting around with a group of my girlfriends, and we were just talking about how different our expectations for boys, like what we were looking for from a guy and what was actually going on. And there's this one teen boy in the room, and he just stands up and he's like exasperated. He's like, we don't know what y'all want. We don't know that, like, all the things you were just talking about. This is completely new to me. I had no idea any of this. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me. And we were learning about AI in school, because I go to this weird school. And I was like, I mean, there has to be a solution to this where I can take what girls are thinking and want guys to know and translate that and get it, communicate that to as many teen boys as possible. So that's what I've been working on.
And Elle, you're developing this app, but you've also got a big following on social media, right? So that's kind of how you're getting the word out.
Yes.
Talk us through how you started the social media account. What boundaries did you set up for yourself? You talk about this being safe and sort of bridging a gap. We're going to dive into a lot of the topics you brought up top, but I want to have people have a sense of how you came up with the parameters and how this is, as you say, a safe dating guide.
Yes. So like I was talking about, that conversation, my first thought was, I'll make TikToks. I'm going to add one TikTok to the For You page that when a guy or girl come across it, they're like, oh, this is said in my language, but also makes logical sense. I didn't want to be like the Andrew Tate or the like feminine, like the dark feminine. I was like, that was what was going viral on TikTok at the time. And I was like, this is just leading teens astray. And so what I did was I spent all my time reading these research papers, and then I would re-say it in this like fun TikTok way. I threw in some like date ideas that those were my own, but all of the advice I was giving, I wanted to make sure that it was safe and that it wasn't just at the time what 15-year-old Elle has to say about dating, but actually it was all backed by science. And so I started making videos, and it blew up. I think I went 0 to 100K in 5-6 weeks. And I hadn't really posted on social media before. And at first I was like, haha, like I'm this expert influencer. Like I know this, like I'm so good at this. But I very quickly realized that it wasn't that I was this expert influencer. I set up my phone, recorded in the dark, and then would just put the text over the video. And what I realized was that this was what teens needed. It didn't matter what format it came in. I could have made any type of video, but the content that I was delivering, teens were so desperate for, because teen dating, it's kind of seen as a taboo topic. When you look up teen dating on TikTok, I show up. So it's kind of like, it's something that teens didn't have. And that's why they were so desperate for, and why I went viral so quickly. And the idea for the app came from the number of DMs I was getting from boys and girls. And they were like, oh, like I want to ask out this girl, but I have no idea how. And at first I was like, I'm going to respond to every single one. I'm going to change dating one DM at a time. But I quickly realized I just did not have time for that. And so what I did was I took all of my TikTok advice, and all of the studies that I was reading. And I just trained an LLM, a simple model, like a website on it. And I posted it. I promoted like it in maybe one video and got 10,000 users in like 1 week. And so for me, I was like, okay, I'm onto something here. My TikTok has proven that. My MVP has proven that. And now I wanted to take it into something real with my app.
Okay, so we're hooked on the word safe, which I want to circle back to.
Yes.
My guess is that all of those followers are not necessarily drawn first and foremost by the word safe. What do you think draws them in? And let's talk about how you meet their needs. And then let's talk about the safety piece.
What I think is not a misconception about teens, but what I think a lot of like parents, it's just not natural for them to think, is that teens are actually pretty logical in the way they think about, like, yes, their prefrontal cortex is not developed and they're all on their limbic system, all emotion, but they do actually, when they hear something that is logical and makes sense, they're like, oh, this clicked, I'm going to change my actions now. And so I think that was what I was providing, was like, and it wasn't complex things. I wasn't talking about, I don't even think I was really talking about attachment styles. I was really talking about, if you want to ask out a girl, you should do this. You know, right now you're being fed this on TikTok, and that's why you're not getting a date. And so it was just kind of correcting their assumptions. And then a few comments of boys saying, oh, I tried this and it worked, was all I needed for every teen boy to watch it, or every teen girl to watch it and be like, oh, this is the right thing to do. So it was definitely not the safety of it. That's, more my messaging to parents. And it's like kind of a secret I keep under wraps. Like, this is secretly the best way to date. But to teens, I'm like, this is how you're going to get a date.
Okay. But part B, before we move to safety, is how did you know? Like when I was 15 or 16, I would have never had the answer to how to get a group of people, like a very diverse group of people, to respond to a dating request. Like, what beyond science, what are you pulling from, and where is your advice? Can anyone replicate this, or like teach us?
I wish more people talked about it. I'm the messenger right now, but if a lot of people like started giving my message, I'd be ecstatic. Like, that's exactly what I want. And I think what I'm able to provide is the teen perspective. Teens aren't going to go read the studies, and everything, the viral stuff they're watching is just not actual helpful advice. And so that's what I do, is I bridge the two, where I spent hundreds of hours researching, diving into like the science behind everything. And, maybe I spent a little bit of time on TikTok during this time of my life. And so, I knew the trends. I knew what was going on. I knew the social dynamics. I knew the term situationship, and I'd also lived it myself. I've been on Snapchat, I've been on Instagram, and before I was this dating expert, I experienced the bad parts of it, where it was like, oh, like boys sending WYLL as the opening line, which, stands for what you look like. And a girl is then supposed to send photos. Like, I had experienced that directly, which was why I was the best messenger, and still currently am the best messenger for giving it in a way that teens understand, because I'm very into the culture. I've experienced it personally, and I now know the right solution. And so those three together is why I've kind of been able to deliver this advice in a way that teens receptive.
Are there topics, Elle, that you won't touch?
My bot and my advice on TikTok, it's all supposed to be teens are having questions that their parents can't respond to because like situationship, talking stage, there's a language barrier, even if they both speak English, And so that's more what I address. But when it comes to things like, I think that my boyfriend is like physically abusive or if it crosses a line, my bot will immediately reply, hey, this is not something that, I'm not qualified for this. Go talk to a parent, because I think that's so crucial is, AI is really great at giving information that you give it, but actually like helping someone through something emotional like that, that's something that a parent or a trusted adult needs to help a teen with. And so that, and that's the key is my bot doesn't understand that. There's a lot of bots out there that will try to deal with that. No, for me, I'm the teen safety. That's my number one priority. So when it crosses the line, I immediately go talk to a parent.
Right. So this is where, and let's cover safety for a minute. This is where you feel like you're putting up some guardrails. So some of it is what you don't cover because you're expert at some things, but not at others. And let me say, there are a lot of very mature things about you, but one of the most mature things about you is your recognition of where your expertise ends.
Yes.
That takes a lot for anyone to say, I don't know. And it's very impressive. I know a couple of doctors who could benefit from that language. It's just saying. So that's huge.
So, Elle, adults assume one thing about what kids care about and what they're up to when in fact, it's actually sort of misguided.
Yes.
In your work, in your experience, as an influencer and a guide about teen dating, what do teens care about? What are they looking for? What are they interested in?
I think that a big misconception is that teens aren't looking for connection, and that, sex and relationships has kind of been pushed to the side. For a lot of parents, they're focused a lot more on getting into college, extracurriculars, studies. Teens are looking for connection, not online, they're not looking for a situationship on Snapchat. They're looking for an in-person connection with someone because that's human nature, and it hasn't magically changed because of the advent of social media and college stress. That is what all teens are looking for, but right now they aren't getting the guidance that they need to correctly, safely, and effectively fulfill that want in themselves. And so it leads to them having huge isolation issues. We wonder why teen loneliness is on the rise when, they don't even know how to ask out a girl anymore.
Are teens aware of what they want? And do they share it with each other? And the adult generation is just missing that conversation because they're not in on that conversation? Or is there a pretty large segment of teenagers who don't even know what they're looking for?
I think it's both. I think that it's definitely manifests differently in girls and boys. Boys don't really talk to their friends. Oh, like I kind of have a crush on this girl. I think she's cute. Like that's not really where their conversations end up going. But I think with girls, yes, like girls are that's the number one topic of conversation is, oh, like who do you have a crush on? Like that's still, that hasn't changed. But I think that the difference is before it was they would talk to each other. They would get some idea about what the truth was in their heads because they were all talking with each other. And then they'd go talk to their parents about it. And their parents would be able to give really, really good advice because it was the same. Their parents had literally lived the exact same situation or something similar. So they could adequately help their child. But now what happens is girls are talking with each other, then they go on the internet and they like find something else. And they if they're not sure about something, rather than asking their parents, they kind of just like go on TikTok. But then even if they do go to their parents don't really know what's going on. They don't. When I tell my dad that the boy I liked saved my Snap in chat, that is the same level of romantic that like him writing, do you like me? Yes, no. And giving the note to the girl in class, like it's still the same feeling, but it manifests very differently. And so parents are looking at it like all she does is sit on that phone all day. Well, actually, all she does is sit on that phone texting her boyfriend, which is the same thing. It's just, it's manifests very differently now. And that's why parents are like, my girl doesn't go out to date. She must not be interested in relationships. When in reality, she is interested in relationships, but she doesn't have the social skills to go out. So instead, she just is on her phone trying to form some sort of connection.
So, Al, this is so great. I think it's really important for adults to hear because we are quick to judge and we are quick to make assumptions about kids' realities when in fact we don't totally understand them. So we are going to get to a vocabulary lesson.
Okay.
We're going to lay a little more foundational groundwork here, and then we will get into some vocabulary which you used, and we talk about in the book. We learned so much from people your age and a little bit older who teach us all the time all the ways in which we are misguided, misinformed, and ignorant. But before we do that, can we dig in a little bit more to two factors that are affecting teens dating or lack thereof? And you mentioned them up top, but I really want to dive into this. One is COVID and the impact of COVID and lockdown and social isolation and possibly more screen time than had previously been used. And the other is the impact of social media for good and for bad, right? You're an example of a good influence. You also mentioned somebody like Andrew Tate. So let's explore, let's start with COVID and kind of what you've observed, how it's impacted teens, and then we'll move to social media.
What I've observed with COVID is that teens, they all went online. They didn't go to school. And depending what age, but really any age that they would be in school, they missed a critical year of development. And I think that, the younger, the worse. But older, I mean, think of prom. Prom is usually like the first time you ask out the first girl, that's your first moment to make that kind of connection. But then prom's canceled and you don't make that connection. And so many teens lost that first time for them to practice their social skills, practice that emotional vulnerability and putting themselves out there, that now a study just released that 45% of men ages 18 to 25 have never asked out a girl. And that is because they didn't learn how to do it in their teen years. COVID, social media, all of that stuff, they didn't magically wake up after graduating high school and be like, I know exactly how to ask out a girl, or for girls knowing how to ask out a guy. And so, so I think that COVID, you lost those few opportunities that are so crucial to learning how to date someone and ask someone out.
But can I ask very specifically about asking someone out?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm asking for a friend. So we've talked to a ton of young people about hookup culture, about situationships, this alternative to the path that we often went through, that doesn't look like asking someone out. The way that connection is made looks different than going on a date. So can you help us square those two things? That you are growing up in a world where some people are taking a relationship path similar to their parents and grandparents, but some people are taking a totally different route. And does dating in the way that you define it still fit into the world of situationships and hookup culture? And how do you reconcile those things?
And I think that we've come to the moment where we have to define some terms. So
let's do that.
Al, will you, as you answer Cara's question, will you give your definitions of terms like hookup culture and situationships and quote unquote talking or quote unquote dating?
Okay.
As we go, we'll do a rolling vocab lesson.
Okay. I think I can illustrate the beginnings of a talking stage best just a teen experience, and I can define some terms. So the average teen relationship starts with being on Snapchat and scrolling through your quick ad, which is basically just a list of people. You can just see their Bitmoji, so just an avatar of them. You can see how many mutual friends you have with them. And so it'll be like 20 mutual friends. And you'll be like, oh, okay, we run in the same circles, and you add them. And so I'll do this from a girl's POV because I have direct experience with this. You will then add them on Snapchat, wait for them to add you back. Sometimes they won't. And that's, a little bit of rejection in and of itself. But then if they do add you back, the first thing that they will say to you, the opening line will be WYLL. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier. But what that means is what you look like. And the girl is then expected to send photos. And the guy will either block her or continue to talk to her. And I just think that this is such a great example of how teens are starting relationships because it's on Snapchat, which is literally an app designed for sexting, but also it's so focused on looks because all you're doing is sending photos back and forth to each other. That's how most relationships are starting. And I think it's bad on the boys' part and the girls' part, where it's the guy, his dad tells him, hey, go ask out a girl, you got, like, go do this. And the guy's like, okay, and sends WYLL because that's like it's going in one ear and it's translating in his brain into the teen action. And it's like, it's become like, oh, that's just what everyone else does. That's the excuse. It's just the culture around it. But then girls also need to start, not sending the photos. Like, well, what are we doing? Like, like it's so objectifying for girls. And, I'm trying to preach like, hey, learn how to say no, have power over that.
So what's an alternative if you add each other on Snap instead of sending photos? But I know part of Snap is literally sending photos back and forth.
Yes.
But what's an alternative to getting to know each other online if you're not doing that version of things?
So I have some tips for this. I think Snapchat can actually be an excellent, when used the right way to start a conversation. Because you're sending photos, the number one thing that I suggest is to send a photo of a conversation starter. That's not, like you trying to look like provocative. Like that is not the conversation starter we're looking for. If you're, I don't know, at a baseball game, sending a photo of the baseball game and putting text being like, or sending that photo and then being like, oh, do you like baseball? Or something like that, where it's like, it's such an easy conversation starter, where if a guy likes a girl and she sends a photo that's somewhat of a conversation starter, he'll take it because he's just looking for that opening and that connection. And
if he's not, then maybe he's not the right guy to continue having a conversation with, or vice versa.
Right there is what I always, when girls go on dates, their mindset is usually, how do I get him to like me? Like what can I change myself into to make this guy like me? And what I try to teach is, no, you need to go into it thinking, are we compatible? Do I like him? And trying to form that kind of a dynamic between girls going on dates with guys.
Does this dynamic reverse across the genders? I would imagine there are plenty of young women who ask the same question of guys, right? What do you look like?
Well, it's less so with girls because girls don't really like receiving it, and the societal norm is guys sending it, like making the first move. So it's definitely more prevalent for guys to send it, but that does not mean that girls aren't being, they see, like when they like a guy, they start to snap him later at night with their makeup done, in like a tank top where they can, it isn't just like a guy out of nowhere thinking, oh, I'm just going to be super, not even like I'm going to make this sexual immediately, but the girl is usually also feeding into it. And so it's from both sides.
I'm going to resist the temptation to take this conversation down the bathroom selfie rabbit hole, and instead we're going to keep it focused on dating. But let's then go back. So now, so we've defined a couple of initial terms. Do you want to talk a little bit about situationships?
That's a great thing for parents to understand. And so that what I described, the WYLL warrior is usually the instigator of a situationship. And so now this is very popular where it's like you're in the same class, you don't talk in person, and then you go home and text, which is crazy. And I think
which is called talking.
Yes.
It's called a talking stage situationship, but you don't talk in person. It's crazy. And I know I have a lot of friends, but then also everyone on social media that DMs me is always talking about, I feel like so connected with this guy. Like at the moment we leave school, we're texting until the next morning when we get to school, and then it ends. And it's because that the social skills that teens are developing are solely online. They know how to navigate Instagram, the socially appropriate time to like a guy's story, but they don't know how to go up and say, hi, I like your shoes. Like
I am trying to imagine what that must feel like. That description is so foreign to our youth experience. And I think it
Yes.
nails it. I mean, in terms of what we have seen talking to teenagers, I think that description pretty much nails it. How does it get to the next step?
So, Elle, you've talked about one scenario, kids, teenagers talking, quote unquote, online, but not actually speaking to each other in person. If someone is not enjoying that situationship, how do they change it? What do they do? And let's take that scenario into the world of hookup culture, but let's begin with kind of some advice about how to change this situation.
Yes. So I think that right now, the most common way for girls to get in person, because that's usually what they're looking for. They're like, I don't want to just text you. I want to be in person. Is they'll suggest, based on something they've been talking about, some mutual like interest, being like, oh, we've been talking about this movie. I should go over to your house and we should watch this movie. The problem is that when the boy, this has been my experience and what I've seen with a lot of my friends and also online, is that the boy sees this as, oh, he thinks they've already been on dates because he knows her. You know, they've been talking. He thinks he's already past the step of like getting to know her. And now when they hang out, like it's totally fine for him to make a move because he feels like it's not because it's the first date, because it's not, because we've known each other for so long. And so I think that that's what scares a lot of girls, where they would actually rather just be in this talking stage than initiate something and then it turn into something sexual in person, because that's when they don't have as much control. Like they can't just, block and leave the conversation. There's a little bit more pressure for girls when you're in person.
Can you say more about that? Because I think that's a really, really important point for adults to understand. Again, we judge, we dismiss, we negate the experience of being online, but you're talking about both a good and a bad way of protecting ourselves. On the one hand, it keeps people from taking healthy risks in relationships. On the other hand, it can help people feel safe. So can you say a little bit more about that, Elle?
I think that that's what parents don't understand is a huge misconception, is that they think, oh, they just talk online. That's not a real relationship. They don't actually have a connection. But in fact, I think it's a complete 180 where teens can now get closer in 1 week than their parents did in a month. Because before, in past generations, it was like, oh, we go on a date once a week. So we hang out for like 3 hours a week.
Sipping soda in the soda shop.
Yeah, exactly. But now it's 20% of teenagers report that they think something is wrong in their relationship if they are not communicating with their partner hourly. So it's just it is like constant communication.
And there's the power of being left unread, which is,
Yes.
and I'd love for you to describe this.
Yes. Define that for us, Elle.
So being left unread is basically micro rejection, where you send a guy a chat, a photo, anything. He opens it, he sees it. He has the time to respond because he opened it. He chooses not to. And so that's seen as like the ultimate, like the worst thing that could happen to you is if you text a guy and are like, hey, like, I like you, we should hang out, and he leaves it unopened. That is, in teen world, the pinnacle of everything is over, my life is over. It seems like a breakup without the guy having to say a single thing.
Because you've made yourself vulnerable.
Yes.
And you've been rejected.
That's what I try to explain to parents, is like, it's the same feelings that you felt your teen is feeling, even though it's manifesting in different ways, where it's like, yes, the boy didn't go up to her and say, I'm rejecting you, it's over. But leaving her unopened, it evokes that same feeling, because now that's the standard of how you reject someone.
And there's a difference between opening it, reading it, and not responding, and not even opening it, which is a different, from what I see among the kids in the 20-somethings that I know, that not even opening it is a different level of aggression.
Yes, especially on Snapchat, where you can read something without opening it.
Right.
And so it's like you can sneakily read it without the person knowing. And so if it truly was they never read it, I don't think teens would feel as hurt. It's the fact that that they read it and they didn't even dignify it with like opening for the chance of responding. I think that the way teens describe it is opened is a rejection, delivered is confusion, where you're like,
Yes.
are they going to respond? Are they just waiting to think of something? Did they read it? You're just completely lost. Versus an opened is kind of like, okay, this isn't working. But a delivered is just like, I don't know what's going to happen.
It's like the scene from Swingers where he leaves so many voicemail, right? I mean, it's like, that's where it goes. I want to get to solutions, but before we get to solutions, I just want to insert one big asterisk to this whole conversation, which is the idea of there's physical intimacy in person, but there's also a lot of sexual intimacy in the sharing of nudes and of even dressed but provocative images. And can you just spend a minute talking about how the sharing of different kinds of images has impacted teen dating life?
The way I say it is sexting is the new first base, where it's just a show of interest. It's become so normalized that teens don't view it as like, oh, this is like a very physically, emotionally intimate thing. It's just like, I really want this guy to understand that like, I'm serious about him. He should stop talking to other girls because like, I'm the one for him. And it's like, expressing interest rather than like, and I think that like a lot of girls struggle with that. Like even if their nudes don't get leaked, which is way too common, they still feel violated afterwards because they don't understand. They were like, oh, I was just expressing interest. But now I'm like, I feel like, oh my gosh, like I feel very emotionally, physically like vulnerable with this person who's not even next to me, who is, could be across the country. And so it's a weird feeling for teens to go through. And I mean, being left unopened from something like that is just like this heart-wrenching moment.
Elle, what if you are hooking up with someone? And I'm going to ask you to share your definition of hooking up. Because in my family, I think hooking up is everything but sex. But my children and my mother think hooking up is sex. So, you can figure that one out. What is hooking up? What happens once people start hooking up? I've heard there's like a time limit of hooking up after which people have to decide, are they going to now start dating or is it going to end because it can't keep going on this way? Let's like walk us through the lifespan of these different stages.
I think before it was, you talk to them in person, you go on a date, you start dating, then you have sex. Now it's like you become very close with them before talking to them in person. And then when you do talk to them in person, there's some sex adjacent is kind of what I call hooking up, where like hooking up kind of, you could say, oh yeah, we're hooking up when you haven't had sex, but you could also use it if you have, because I think there's so many definitions that it's kind of interchangeable. But the point is you can be very physically intimate with someone and then get into a relationship where they're seen as like, you're proving I really like you by hooking up with them versus proving that you really like them by getting into a relationship with them. And so that's kind of like the change in the progression of a teen relationship. I think it would be incorrect to say that more teens are having sex. They're not. But I think the difference is that teens either aren't dating or are doing it in this way. So yes, sex is down, but it's way up for teens who are, pursuing like a physical or even emotional connection.
And am I correct in my understanding that there's sort of like an unwritten rule that like if you've been hooking up for a certain amount of time, you gotta SHIT or get off the pot situation?
That comes from girl pressure. Guys would just like hook up for the rest of eternity and never get into a relationship. That's their mindset, because that's what their guy friends and the boy influencers are saying. Like that's the key. Like that means you've made it. And boys still really want emotional connection, but it's just manifesting in this different way because that's what they're being told. And so, yeah, there's definitely a time limit it's different for every girl, but it starts to be not just the girl, but her friends are like, bro, you've been hooking up with him for how many? It's been 6 weeks and he still doesn't want to date you. It's 2 months. Like, yeah, like that's embarrassing. And then there starts to be that societal pressure, like the social, like, oh my God, maybe he doesn't like me. Like, oh my gosh, like what am I doing? My friends think he doesn't like me. And so that's when girls start pushing for guys, hey, we need to put a label on it. And the guy will either be like, awesome, so that they continue the physical relationship, or they'll be like, no, thank you. And the girl that is brutal for a girl, because it's not like she can go to her parents and be like, hey, I just broke up with a guy. She's like going to her parents being like, hey, I just ended this like deep but weird relationship with this guy, and the parents just don't understand.
And I think one interesting sort of externalizing factor, or externally motivating factor, I should say, is the local peer group that you have really shifts and changes the way that you seek relationships. So what I've noticed with kids that I've watched grow up, what Vanessa has noticed, is what is the norm at one stage in their life, maybe when they're in middle school or in high school, might shift and change as they change friends, as they change locations, as they change when they go to college. So just because you have a kid who seems to value a certain type of relationship, it doesn't mean that they won't be influenced by their peer group and won't shift into a different form. We should leave people with a little bit of hope and sort of not positivity around this, because this isn't negative. This is simply a definition of terms and a description of the current landscape. But let's talk about how adults can best support the kids in their life so they can be in conversation. Like everything we do in every corner of our business life is aimed at opening up conversation. So can you give us some conversational tips for adults, like starting with the most entry level?
And Elle, this conversation's been very hetero dominant, right? It's been like boy and girl. But, you know, your generation is much more fluid and open to all different kinds of arrangements and identities. So in the advice, if you could weave in as a parent is trying to be supportive, not totally understanding the sort of fluidity and different way that kids identify and connect with each other, if you could sort of weave that into the advice, that would be awesome.
For sure. I think that the best thing a parent could do to support their teen is try to learn. I think that that's the difference, is when a teen sits down with their parent, they're just speaking different languages. And so it can feel very like, what's even the point of talking to them? They're not going to understand. I'm just going to go to someone who at least understands what I'm talking about, even if their advice isn't as sound. And so I think that that's the biggest thing. That's why in my app, you can type in any word that your teen says, and it'll give you a definition like I did on this podcast. So I think that trying to learn what is happening, because there's so much fluidity with teens, not just, you know, their relationships, but sexuality and how they express themselves is so much different than what parents are used to. And so I think that that's a huge thing that parents should just try to learn, so that when they're having a conversation, they're like, oh, did he save your snap and chat? And the teen's going to be like, oh, you know what I'm talking about. There's going to be that connection moment where you realize that, you know, they understand. And I think that that's what I tell my parents to do. You know, I sit them down and I give them the rundown of the new slang terms, and then they're ready to go and talk to me about anything. And so I think that would be the best advice from a teen perspective. That's all we want, is we want you to feel like you're going to understand, and to creating a non-judgment zone where the only thing that's not okay is, you know, if something really bad is happening, it's not your fault. It's how can we help you? I think that like teens fear punishment and not being accepted so much, especially with social media. Acceptance is all they want. And so I think that creating a culture where the teen feels, I would rather go to my parents and talk to them than my friends, because I know my parents will accept me no matter what, you know, I'm talking about. I think that understanding the language, but then also being super accepting and non-judgmental, because, you know, you don't really know what's going on as a parent, is going to be the best two things to do.
I want to underscore what you just said, because I think it's amazing advice. The goal in the dynamic, in the relationship between an adult who loves a kid and that kid, is for that kid to be able to know in the back of their mind, I can tell this adult anything because I know they love me. That looks like a lot of different things in different households with different personalities, depending upon your birth order, depending upon the stressors around you, depending upon the adult's own personal history, right? All these things. But at the end of the day, I think those words are exactly it. The kids tend to go to the adults whom they feel, no matter what I say, they will love me. This does not mean if your kid doesn't go to you that they don't think you love them. Okay. Let's be really clear. But the more you can show that lack of judgment and that openness and the desire to acquire their language, the more likely they are to trust in you and to start sharing.
100%.
Elle, this was a joy and a pleasure, and I learned so much. Our listeners will learn so much. Thank you. Thank you for coming on, and happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.